The air in the grand hall of the Crescent Moon Pack was thick with anticipation and the raw, musky scent of 1,000 wolves. They had gathered not for a feast, but for a judgment. At the head of the immense carved table sat Alpha King Valerius, his form a perfect sculpture of granite muscle and royal authority, his silver eyes blazing with impatience. Today was the marking ceremony, the day he was to publicly accept his fated mate, and the mood was soured by his palpable frustration. His wolf, a creature of immense pride and power, was howling a confusing blend of protective possessiveness and utter disdain. Valerius needed a Luna, a warrior queen, a figurehead of strength whose presence alone could quell an enemy pack. He needed a wolf. The great double doors opened, and all eyes turned to the woman who was meant to be his equal. Ilara walked with the quiet grace of a scholar, her simple linen dress clinging to a figure that was lovely, but not imposing. She carried a stack of scrolls, not a weapon, and her scent, faint lavender and parchment, was nearly invisible beneath the heavy, earthy smell of the shifters. She was too human. Valerius felt the familiar, bitter pull of their bond, a warm, soft connection that spoke of domesticity and gentle conversation, everything he did not need. He had hoped, prayed even, that the moon goddess had made a mistake, that the mark on her neck, a faint silver crescent, was a trick of the light. But there it was, the undeniable symbol of their shared destiny. He stood, his height dwarfing the table, and the wolf in him rose to the surface, a threatening growl catching in his throat. The crowd held its breath. This was the moment. The Alpha King would accept his Luna. "Ilara," his voice boomed, hard as ice breaking under pressure. "Step forward," she obeyed, her large, intelligent eyes, the only truly striking feature on her face, meeting his without fear, though her hands trembled slightly on the scrolls. "The moon goddess," Valerius declared, his voice cutting through the silence, "has played a cruel joke. I am Alpha King, protector of all the packs. I require a Luna who can shift, who can fight, who can command. I require a queen, not a soft, breakable human." A collective gasp swept through the hall. Ilara's face, already pale, lost the last vestiges of colour. The faint silver crescent on her neck seemed to glow for a moment, an angry rebuttal from the goddess, before fading into her skin. "Your blood is too diluted, Ilara. You possess no wolf. You are a mere whisper in the storm," Valerius continued, his words designed to wound, to sever the bond with a clean, brutal slice. "I, Valerius, Alpha King of the Crescent Moon Pack, reject you as my fated mate. You are free of your bond. Leave this territory and never return." He watched her, expecting tears, a plea, a dramatic collapse. Instead, a chilling, profound stillness settled over her. The trembling stopped. She looked at him, not with the pain of a rejected lover, but with the cold, assessing gaze of a stranger who had just witnessed a monstrous act. She slowly lowered the scrolls to the floor, the rustle of the parchment the only sound in the dead silence. "As you wish, Alpha King." Her voice was a steady whisper, devoid of emotion. "The bond is severed. I will go." She turned her back on the king and the entire assembly, a gesture of finality that was more powerful than any roar, and walked out the doors, leaving the hall echoing with the shame of her rejection and the unsettling absolute quiet of a prophecy scorned. Valerius felt a brief, sharp pang in his chest where the bond had been, but he quickly dismissed it, attributing it to a phantom limb. He had done what was necessary for his pack. He had chosen strength over destiny, but a seed of unease, dark and cold, had been planted in the heart of his kingdom. Ilara walked out of the opulent stone fortress and into the shadowed forest, her senses hyper-aware, her mind an unnatural blank slate. She felt no heartbreak, no tears, just a vast cold emptiness where the warmth of her fated bond had been. The bond hadn't been just a tether to Valerius. It had been her only tether to the pack, to the supernatural world, and now she was truly, utterly alone. The rejection hadn't broken her heart. It had shattered the cage around her soul. Her feet barely disturbed the damp earth as she followed the invisible boundary line. She was a master cartographer, accustomed to following lines, borders, and paths. Now, she was following the most crucial line of her life, the boundary that separated the Crescent Moon territory from the rest of the world. She carried no supplies, no weapons, nothing but the dress on her back and the memory of Valerius's disdain. She was a blank slate, an exile, and the pack's problem was now her complete freedom. Meanwhile, back in the fortress, the celebrations for the king's prudent choice were forced and hollow. Valerius had immediately begun the search for a new Luna, a fierce female alpha from a neighbouring powerful pack, but an odd, oppressive energy lingered in the air, a shadow that didn't lift. The elders of the pack were the first to voice their concern. Elder Lyra, whose wisdom predated Valerius's rule, approached the king the following morning. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice a low, heavy rumble, "you have defied the moon goddess. Such an act is not without consequence." Valerius, irritated by the pack's collective unease, slammed his fist on his desk. "Nonsense! I chose the good of the pack. The consequence would have been a weak Luna. Ilara was nearly human, Lyra. She would have been a laughingstock to our enemies." "The mark of the goddess is not given lightly, Valerius. Ilara was chosen for a reason, perhaps a purpose we could not yet see," Lyra insisted, her old eyes sharp with fear. "Did you not feel the absolute finality of the severance? It was too quick, too clean. It felt like her decision, not just yours." The comment struck a nerve. Valerius had felt that strange cold snap, the sudden total absence of the bond. He had attributed it to his own immense will, but Lyra's words brought back the image of Ilara's unnerving stillness, her emotionless acceptance. He had expected her to fight, to weep, to beg for him to reconsider. Instead, she had simply agreed and walked away. "The bond belongs to the Alpha King, Lyra. I cut it, and it broke." Valerius dismissed her, his tone brooking no further argument. He was the king, and his word was law even over the fates. Yet, over the next few weeks, strange omens began to plague the pack. The silver of the moonlight seemed duller. The wolves' healing powers were noticeably slower. The young pups were restless, their baby howls taking on a mournful, anxious quality. Hunters reported shadows moving in the deep forest that did not belong to any known creature. These were subtle signs, dismissed by many as mere superstition, but Valerius's wolf paced relentlessly beneath his skin, sensing a gathering darkness. He had created a void by rejecting the gentle light of his mate, and that void, he now realised with a rising sense of dread, was starting to attract something far more terrible than a human Luna, something ancient, hungry, and entirely unwolf. The consequences of his choice were beginning to materialise, not as a gentle rebuke, but as a growing primal threat. 2 months after Ilara's exile, the subtle omens escalated into undeniable terror. The shadow of the Elderwood, the forbidden ancient section of the pack's territory, was deepening. It was said to be the resting place of primal spirits, but now actual creatures were emerging. Hunters began disappearing. They would go into the forest in 2s and 3s, only for their weapons to be found days later. Twisted and blackened, their owners vanished without a trace, leaving no scent of struggle, only a metallic tang in the air that made the wolves' fur stand on end. The strongest, most seasoned warriors were lost, and fear, an emotion alien to the proud Crescent Moon pack, began to spread like a fever. Valerius, whose impatience had turned to grim determination, led the next hunting party. His wolf was a tormented beast, the power he relied on feeling strangely muted. He needed to prove to his pack and to himself that he was still the strongest alpha. They tracked a beast to the edge of the Elderwood, a creature that defied description. It wasn't a rogue wolf or a vampire or any known shifter. It was a shapeless thing of pure, coalesced darkness, its eyes 2 points of malevolent dead light. As Valerius shifted into his gigantic silver wolf, "Ready for the fight," the creature pulsed, and the scent of that metallic tang, like burnt copper and ozone, hit him, paralysing him for a split second. The shadow creature lunged, and Valerius met it with a roar, but his claws, which could rend steel, simply passed through the creature's shadowy form. It was incorporeal, a creature of nightmare. When it struck back, its touch left not a wound but a freezing dead emptiness. Valerius's wolf staggered back, his spirit momentarily dimmed, his power leeching away. The creature was fighting not his body but his essence. The battle was a massacre. Valerius and his betas, among the strongest wolves in the world, were utterly ineffective. They fought shadows with teeth and muscle. The Alpha King himself suffered a wound that should have instantly healed, yet it remained a throbbing dark stain on his flank. his innate healing struggling to fight a foe that was purely magical. They retreated in shame and defeat, the creatures of shadow melting back into the Elderwood, leaving behind a silence heavier than any howl of pain. Valerius was forced to admit the horrifying truth to his pack. They were facing a threat for which their raw physical strength was useless. It was a magic threat, an ancient power, one that required an equal and opposite force to repel. Later that night, as Valerius sat alone, gazing at the oppressive darkness of the Elderwood, he felt a chilling realization. Lyra's words returned to him. Ilara was chosen for a reason, a purpose we could not yet see. He pulled out the only thing Ilara had left behind, a leather-bound scroll she had dropped upon her ejection. It was a fragment of an ancient text she had been translating, a text about the first shifters, before the moon goddess. It spoke of a time when the world was ruled by both light and shadow, and of a rare lineage, a forgotten bloodline that carried the dormant, primal energy of the void. They were the ones who couldn't shift, who were too human because their power was not of the wolf, but of the deeper earth, a power that could command or destroy, the very shadows Valerius now feared. Valerius had rejected his mate for not being a wolf. Now he needed her to be what she truly was, the key to the darkness. His royal pride turned to cold desperation. He had to find Ilara, not to accept her as his Luna, but to beg the rejected, silent human to save his kingdom. The Alpha King, who scorned all weakness, was about to embark on a journey of profound, desperate humility. His pack's only hope now lay with the woman whose destiny he had brutally cast aside. Ilara had not travelled far, but she had travelled into the heart of a different kind of wilderness. She settled in the desolate, forgotten lands that bordered the werewolf territories, lands too rugged for permanent settlement, where the spirits of forgotten magics lingered. She had found refuge in an old, crumbling stone tower, long abandoned by an order of human scholars. In the silence of her exile, something profound had changed within her. The severance of the bond had not just freed her, it had awakened her. The moment Valerius's words had cut the connection, she felt a sudden rush of cold energy flood the void he had created. It was the power of her bloodline, dormant for generations, now roused by the shock of rejection. She wasn't too human. She was more than human. A host for an ancient, dark form of magic that existed outside the moon goddess's dominion. Her studies in the tower were no longer about dusty history. They were about mastery. The rejection had not broken her spirit, but hardened it. She felt no lingering affection for Valerius, only the cold, sharp focus of one who had been wronged and found a greater purpose. She practiced her power, learning to summon the very shadows that now plagued the werewolf kingdom. She learned the metallic tang was the scent of pure, unadulterated void magic, the energy of creation's opposite. She could now feel it, taste it, and terrifyingly command it. One evening, as she traced complex runes on the stone floor, the air in the tower shimmered. A deep, agonizing sorrow, a wave of despair washed over her. It wasn't hers. It was the collective fear of the Crescent Moon Pack, and at its centre, the sharp, anxious despair of Valerius's wolf. The psychic link, which Valerius believed was severed, was only muted. The powerful connection between fated mates was not easily destroyed. Instead of the gentle warmth of love, it now only transmitted the raw, visceral terror of the king. She saw fleeting images in her mind. Valerius, wounded, his silver fur matted with dark blood, the monstrous shadow creatures tearing through the woods, the fear in the eyes of the pack children. It was a vision of impending doom, a self-inflicted wound caused by the king's pride. The power inside her responded instantly, a surge of cold, protective fury. It was not concern for Valerius, but a primal, almost possessive rage over the destruction of her destiny. The life he had scorned, the future she was meant to protect, was being annihilated because of his arrogance. The realization was stark. She had been meant to stand beside him, not as a gentle Luna, but as the counterforce to this very darkness. The rejection had simply turned her, from a defender of the light into a wielder of the darkness, needed to fight the void. Ilara knew the shadows Valerius was fighting were feeding on the raw energy of fear and resentment, the very emotions that had pulsed in the grand hall on the day of her rejection. She had been the dam keeping the ancient power out, and Valerius had personally broken the foundation. She stood up, her eyes gleaming with a new, dark light. She was no longer the soft scholar. She was the void's mistress. She knew the king would come for her, not out of regret, but necessity. When he arrived, he would find the human he rejected was now a force of nature, one who would offer her assistance not as a meek mate, but as a sovereign demanding a price. She was prepared to save his pack, but only on her own terrifying, unyielding terms. The Alpha King would learn that power, in its truest form, did not always wear silver fur. Valerius and a small contingent of his most loyal, though gravely weakened, betas followed the trail. The pack was on the brink of collapse, confined to the fortress walls, the shadow creatures growing bolder with each passing night. The king carried the scroll Ilara had dropped, its ancient text a constant, humiliating reminder of his folly. He had learned from Elder Lyra that Ilara's lineage traced back to the human servants who had first chronicled the world. Before the moon goddess's ascension, a group rumoured to have been tainted by a primal, earth-based magic the wolves had long dismissed as weak sorcery. Now Valerius understood the truth. It was not weak, but a hidden, non-shifter power, the only thing that could stand against the void. The tracking was slow and agonizing. Ilara was not leaving a wolf's trail, but the faint, almost imperceptible scent of crushed lavender and cold iron, the iron scent a new and disturbing element. Valerius's pride was a physical ache in his throat. He, the Alpha King, was tracking a human he had scorned, praying to the very goddess he had defied that she would forgive him enough to save his people. They found her by the crumbling tower in the desolate moorland. It was a place of oppressive, raw magic, where the wind seemed to whisper forgotten curses. Valerius found her standing on the highest parapet, silhouetted against a bruised twilight sky. She wasn't wearing the simple linen dress anymore. She was cloaked in robes of deep, absolute black, stitched with runes that seemed to drink the light. The faint silver crescent on her neck was now glowing, not with a gentle luminescence, but with a cold, intimidating violet light. As he shifted back to his human form, his wound throbbing painfully, he was struck by the change. The soft edges of the scholar were gone, replaced by a terrifying, focused intensity. Her eyes, usually warm and filled with curiosity, were now cold and hard, the colour of twilight and filled with an ancient, raw intelligence. "Ilara," Valerius managed, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and shame. His wolf, which had been silent for days, whined, a sound of submission and desperate relief. "Alpha King Valerius," she replied, her voice a low, melodic tone that resonated with a power that made the stones of the tower tremble. She did not descend. "You have travelled far to seek the company of a soft, breakable human." The sarcasm was delivered without heat, making it infinitely more cutting. Valerius dropped to one knee, a gesture he had never performed for anyone. His betas looked on, stunned by the sight of their formidable king kneeling to the woman he had rejected. "I was wrong," he admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "My arrogance has cost my pack dearly. We are fighting a force of the void, a power we cannot touch. Elder Lyra believes your lineage, your power, is the only counter to the shadow creatures." He looked up at her, shedding the pride he had carried for a lifetime. "Ilara, I beg you, return to the Crescent Moon Pack, not as my Luna, you owe me nothing, but as the only person who can save my people. I will give you anything you ask." Ilara finally descended, floating rather than walking, the robes billowing around her. She stopped just inches from him, and the metallic tang, stronger now, was overpowering. It was the scent of absolute untamed magic. "Anything, Valerius?" she asked, the violet glow of her neckmark pulsing. "I will return. I will fight the shadow. But you will not take me back as a mate. You will take me back as your sovereign." Valerius stared, his jaw tight. He had offered his pack. She was demanding his crown. His choices were clear: lose his pack to the shadow, or surrender his power to the woman he had so brutally cast out. Valerius knew he had no choice. The weight of his dying pack was heavier than his crown. "Agreed," he grit out, his voice heavy with the forced surrender. "You will return as the sovereign of the pack. My authority will be secondary to yours until the shadow is vanquished." Ilara smiled, a cold, unsettling curve of her lips that held no warmth. "Good, the agreement stands. Now rise, King. I will need your strength, but your pride must remain on the ground. Her first acts as sovereign were immediate and decisive. She did not return to the fortress, which she deemed a magnet for the shadow. Instead, she led them to an abandoned open meadow on the edge of the elderwood, where she began to prepare a ritual site. She commanded the baiters, who watched her with a mixture of fear and awe, to collect specific, rare, uncorrupted stones from a stream, and to harvest certain herbs that were poisonous to wolves, but vital to her magic. Her orders were precise, her knowledge encyclopedic. She was transforming from the gentle scholar into a formidable, tactical general. Valerius, forced to follow her commands, watched her with grudging admiration. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of power, the air around her always slightly colder. He found himself reporting to her, outlining the creature's attack patterns, discussing the pack's dwindling resources. She listened not with a wolf's predatory instinct, but with a mathematician's logic. The creatures feed on the ambient energy of chaos and despair, she explained, tracing a complex pattern in the dirt with a silver-tipped wand that had appeared from the folds of her robe. The more you fear them, the stronger they become. Your strength, Valerius, your raw muscle, is a blunt weapon against a magical shield. We must fight darkness with controlled darkness. She revealed the true nature of her power, the ability to draw and focus the primal void energy that the shadow creatures were made of. She wasn't a wolf, but a living conduit, a master of the very essence that was destroying them. The reason the moon goddess had marked her was not for her to be a wolf, but to be the opposite of the wolf, the counterbalance. That night, the shadow creatures attacked. They poured out of the elderwood, a terrifying, silent tide of blackness aimed at the small group of wolves. Valerius shifted instantly, a desperate snarl ripping from his throat, ready to sacrifice himself. No! Ilara's voice was a command that sliced through the night air. She stood alone at the centre of the meadow, radiating that cold, violet light. She raised her arms, and the shadows of the surrounding trees seemed to detach from the wood, pooling around her feet. The air tasted of ozone and power. The attacking creatures paused, their malevolent light eyes fixed on her. They sensed the power, recognizing it as their own, but twisted and commanded by a higher will. Ilara's voice boomed, chanting in a language Valerius had never heard, a primal tongue of earth and shadow. The void energy within her erupted, a column of swirling, inky blackness that shot into the sky. She wasn't summoning a creature. She was summoning the absence of light, a focused, controlled beam of pure nothing. As the shadow creatures lunged, Ilara drove the beam of pure void energy into the ground. A shockwave of cold darkness expanded outward. Where the creatures passed through her magical barrier, they didn't bleed or die. They simply stopped existing. They imploded, turning into nothing but the metallic tang and a faint puff of smoke, their energy absorbed by the force of Ilara's will. She was eradicating them at a fundamental level. Valerius, the Alpha King, watched, stunned into silence, as the rejected human effortlessly defeated the enemy that had almost destroyed him. The battle was a terrifying success. Ilara's raw, dark power was the antidote to the creatures of the void. She eradicated the attacking wave in minutes, leaving the meadow silent and covered in a chilling layer of magical frost. Valerius and his baiters were safe, but deeply unnerved. The king approached her, shaking off the awe to find a core of professional gratitude. "You saved us, Sovereign. The pack is in your debt." Ilara, exhausted but resolute, lowered her wand. The violet glow around her faded, and the human vulnerability of her form returned briefly. "The debt is not yet paid, King. This was a skirmish. The source of the shadow remains, an ancient rift in the Elderwood, caused by your pack's excessive reliance on light magic, the moon goddess's power, which created a powerful vacuum for the counterforce." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "My power is effective, but it comes with a terrible price. The void energy I wield is addictive. Every time I use it, it takes a piece of my humanity. The more I save your pack, the more human I cease to be." This was the true price, the ultimate consequence of his rejection. He had scorned her humanity, and now, to save his people, he was forcing her to shed it. "I need access to the source of your pack's strength to fuel my final ritual," Ilara continued, her tone grave. "I need the heartstone of the Crescent Moon Pack, the sacred relic that harnesses the moon goddess's light and sustains your pack's collective power. Valerius stared at her in shock. The Heartstone? It is the core of our existence. If it leaves the fortress, the pack will lose its full ability to shift, to heal. It will make us mortal. Precisely, Ilara stated, completely unmoved. The stone's overwhelming light is what created the countervoid. I do not intend to take the stone. I intend to temporarily darken it. I will draw the pure, uncorrupted moon goddess energy from the stone and channel it against the void's rift. It is the only way to seal the portal completely. Your pack will be weakened during the ritual, King, but they will not be destroyed. It is the only choice. Valerius felt the weight of the crown he had so carelessly risked. He saw the cold logic in her eyes. He had demanded a sacrifice of her humanity. Now she was demanding a sacrifice of his absolute power. He returned to the fortress and gathered the elders, his narrative one of blunt necessity. He explained Ilara's power, her terms, and the necessity of handing over the Heartstone. The pack was terrified, but their faith in the Alpha King's judgment, even after his mistake, was the last thing they held on to. He had to convince them to trust the rejected human. The time for pride is over, Valerius told them, his voice ringing with sober finality. We rejected her for being human. We must now trust the power she wields. Give her the stone. It is the price of our survival. The decision was agonizing, but unanimous. The elders carefully unsealed the chamber, and Valerius carried the Heartstone, a massive, humming crystal of pure moonlight, out of the fortress. As he delivered the sacred relic to Ilara, he felt the last vestiges of his royal arrogance crumble. He had truly surrendered his kingdom to his rejected mate. Ilara set the Heartstone in the centre of the ritual site. She was now fully cloaked in her dark power, her skin glowing with the same eerie violet light as her mark. She was a vision of terrifying, dark royalty. Valerius and his remaining wolves stood guard, their forms weakened by the distance from the stone, but their resolve bolstered by Ilara's fierce control. The final confrontation began. The rift in the Elderwood opened fully, a black maw that spewed forth a legion of shadow creatures. Ilara stood firm, the Heartstone radiating blinding white light next to her. She began the ritual. She did not fight the shadows. She commanded them. Her voice was a symphony of power, the ancient language flowing like molten metal. She extended her hand to the Heartstone, and the pure, white light of the moon goddess was violently drawn into her palm, where it met the inky blackness of the void energy she wielded. Ilara's body became the crucible, the point where light and dark clashed. She was a nexus of creation and annihilation. The resulting power was a wave of pure, balanced energy, a power that had not been seen since the world's creation. She channeled the light, now mixed with her dark essence, and unleashed it upon the rift. The shadow creatures shrieked, a sound of pure terror, as the balanced energy struck them. They dissolved instantly, their essence pulled back into the void. Ilara pushed the mixed energy harder, her eyes flashing purple, her features contorted by the effort. Finally, with a sound like a mountain cracking, the rift closed. The black maw vanished, the shadow creatures were gone, and the Elderwood fell silent. Ilara collapsed, the black robes falling around her. Valerius ran to her side, his movements faster than his now mortal healing could handle. He gently lifted her, his massive hands careful not to crush her frail human form. He looked at her face, still human, but aged, the eyes holding a wisdom that spanned centuries. The bond was still absent, but in its place was a deep, raw respect and a terrible, unshakable regret. He had asked her to save them, and she had paid the price of her soul. Ilara, weak but lucid, spoke her final decree. The rift is sealed. The pack is safe. My duty is done. Valerius held her tight. Ilara, the stone. What of the stone? She looked at the Heartstone, now dull, its white light a faint, exhausted glow. It is changed. It has been tempered by the void. The pack's power will return, Valerius, but it will be different, balanced. Your wolves will be stronger, wiser, tempered by the knowledge of the darkness, and they will never again scorn the human blood. She met his eyes, and this time the coldness was mixed with a hint of sorrow for the man he could have been. I asked for your crown, King. I will not take it, but the terms remain. You will rule, but you will never forget the lesson. The Alpha King rejected his mate for being too human. She saved his world by becoming his sovereign, a master of the darkness he despised. You will remember the price. With those words, the last of her energy fled. She did not die, but entered a deep, magical slumber, her body now a vessel of pure, dark-tempered power. Valerius, the Alpha King, returned to his pack with the changed Heartstone and the sleeping form of his sovereign. He took his place back on the throne, humbled, forever bound by regret. He ruled not as a king of pure light, but as a ruler who understood the necessary balance of shadow, his true power forever resting in the hands of the rejected mate who became the dark, formidable queen he never knew he needed.